What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we are talking about Space Marine chapters. With the release of Warzone Nephilim, Space Marine chapters, and the game of Warhammer 40k as a whole, got a big balance overhaul in the form of secondary objectives that really changed the balance of the game and of the Space Marine super faction. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to break down and discuss each Space Marine chapter individually. In this video, we're going to be covering the strengths and weaknesses of each Space Marine chapter, the units that chapter typically takes, and a little bit about each chapter's respective power level. I'll be covering all of the major Space Marine subfactions with printed supplements, but won't be delving into White Dwarf or Forge World chapters. In addition, I'll be considering successor varieties of a chapter as interchangeable with their parent chapter and discussing both varieties together. Before we get into it, here's some terminology that I'm going to be using throughout the video. First off, I'll sometimes use the term subfaction. This is usually to refer to the bracketed keyword in an army, so in this case it's interchangeable with chapter. Every army has a subfaction, but Space Marine subfactions are also called chapters. I'll also be talking about super doctrines. These are a Space Marine specific ability that turn on when the army is affected by a particular combat doctrine. They soup up whatever doctrine the army specializes in. Now to get into the video, we'll start with Codex compliant chapters. These are chapters directly out of the Space Marine Codex, and they largely play the same, but each has a little bit of unique flavor with some special secondaries, stratagems, and unique characters. Imperial Fists are an unfortunate vestigial organ of a subfaction. We're not really starting strong here in terms of Space Marine chapters. I know there are a lot of Imperial Fist stands out there in the community, but I'm sad to say that the Games Workshop design team is apparently not one of them, and doesn't know what actually to do with this whole Space Marine chapter. Unfortunately, the design of Imperial Fists is all over the place. Their core subfaction ability buffs small weapons like bolters, but their super doctrine specifically precludes any potential bolt weapons from benefiting, since their strength characteristic is not going to be high enough to benefit from the ability. They have a lot of access to bonuses against vehicle units, but that leaves them with a gaping hole in their game plan against monster-heavy enemies like demons or tyrannids. On top of that, they're shackled with a thematically cool but mechanically abysmal secondary objective that requires them to perform a complex action on objectives outside their deployment zone for a pittance of VPs, although it does come with a cool cover bonus built in. Unfortunately, in 9th edition, Imperial Fists are certainly the worst Space Marine chapter and are in contention for one of the worst armies in the entirety of the game. While there are some instances where they can be a meta option for their bonuses against vehicle-heavy armies, my advice for new players would be to keep far away from the chapter. If you are set on playing them, focusing on units with a high volume of powerful bolt weapons to take advantage of their subfaction ability is typically the way to go. Heavy bolter-equipped Fire Raptor gunships are especially cool, and Devastator Centurions synergize pretty well with the exploding sixes that they get, while a smattering of units with high-strength weapons like drop Devastators. That's Devastators in a drop pod, for those who don't know. We're going to be talking about those guys quite a lot as we go through all of the different subfactions in this video. Suppressors, Eliminators, Heavy Weapon Hellblasters, or Eradicators can make use of their super doctrine. Heavy infantry units, like those Eradicators or Gravis armored models, can also help synergize with the faction's sub-theme of being kind of survivable, but that's about all I have to say about Imperial Fists. With that, we'll basically move on to the polar opposite of the Imperial Fist chapter in Iron Hands. Whereas Imperial Fists are not that good at anything, Iron Hands are the faction that has everything. While they theoretically have a special synergy with vehicles and heavy weapons, the truth is that Iron Hands can generally adopt almost any playstyle. They have stratagems and psychic powers for increased survivability and damage output, and can play within the main chapter for even more tankiness, with all of their models having a universal damage ignore roll, or adopt a successor build to combo more damage output, especially in melee with abilities like Whirlwind of Rage, which has an interesting synergy with their unique stratagem Orsia's weakness, allowing you to explode your hit rolls into additional wound rolls that can then explode into extra damage. Iron Hands are also blessed with an incredibly effective secondary objective, Cold Fury, which gives them a much more consistent alternative to Odes of Moment, assuming that they're focusing on vehicles. Regardless of the exact chapter that they're playing, whether it's the primary chapter or a successor, Iron Hands lists will typically start with a drop Devastator squad to take advantage of their super doctrine in round 1, and follow that up with some Dreadnoughts to score as Cold Fury and take advantage of March of the Ancients. This is a unique stratagem that allows them to build a powerful ranged platform like a Relic Contemptor Dreadnought and make it protectable with Lookout Sir. And while it can cost a lot of command points, especially in the Warzone Nephilim format, they can combo that out with other warlord traits and abilities to do absolutely insane insane damage. From there, a mix of melee units like Vanguard or Blade Guard veterans creates an incredibly well-rounded and flexible Space Marine army, and probably in contention for the best subfaction that we're going to be talking about in this video. Moving on to one of the other black armored Space Marine chapters, Raven Guard are the masters of stealth and hard-hitting alpha strikes, and they also have been stealthy enough not to see much play throughout the most of 9th edition. The Games Workshop design team has this belief that stealthiness should always equate to forward deployment, redeployment, and pre-game move abilities, but all these abilities do is typically encourage a very aggressive game plan. And this is the case for Raven Guard, whose entire supplement focuses on enhancing threat ranges and deploying units in the center of the table, while including very little in the way of damage bonuses to help cement that alpha strike, or survivability to withstand the opponent's alpha strike if the Raven Guard don't win the initiative roll. While they do have situational bonuses against characters, this can be counteracted by your opponent just, hiding their characters. That said, they do sport a relatively consistent secondary, which provides an easily completable action to perform on objectives for a decent sum of victory points, and situationally some potential damage on opposing units. Raven Guard armies almost entirely focus on jump pack infantry like Vanguard veterans to deliver their increased threat ranges, as well as at least one brick of powerful melee infantry like aggressors or terminators to make use of their forward deployment warlord trait Master of Ambush. Unfortunately, Raven Guards focused on the forward deployment and pre-game move abilities make them unusually susceptible to the roll for first turn, where they will often be able to deliver a crippling blow if they get first turn themselves, but are left with the choice of being awkwardly out of position or deploying too aggressively and getting decimated by an opposing alpha strike should they lose that roll and end up going second. This makes them one of the least consistent Space Marine chapters, giving them a low win rate and making them not one I would recommend to a new player. One of the real success stories coming out of the Warzone Nephilim update was Salamanders. Salamanders went from a situational chapter that was typically overshadowed by the likes of Iron Hands to having one of the best secondaries and most consistent game plans in the faction, and situationally in the entire game. That game plan is focused on assembling a strong defense and holding territory with the Salamanders' characteristic insane damage output. This is personified by their secondary objective, the Promethean Creed, which scores victory points for holding an objective that you choose, surviving enemy attacks on that objective, and destroying enemy units with infantry that are holding that objective. This makes the secondary sometimes situational, since it benefits enormously from missions that have an objective that is close to but not within your deployment zone, since you can't choose a deployment zone objective to be the one that you hold for Promethean Creed. But it's able to score consistently if you have those right conditions. To facilitate this game plan, Salamander's armies are typically full of tanky core infantry, armed with flamer or melta weapons to take advantage of their synergies with both types. This faction's super doctrine of a wound bonus on flame and melta weapons makes them one of the best users of the game's preeminent anti-armor weapon, the multi-melta, and flamers with +1 to wound and +1 AP from their tactical doctrine bonuses can even threaten many vehicles. Stack on top of that synergies with some incredible special characters like Adrax Agatone, Vulcan Heston, or Brayarth Ashmantle, as well as powerful smash character builds, and Salamanders present a phenomenally dangerous, if relatively inflexible army. That army will typically be composed of Melta drop Devastators to add some forward pressure to a core of Eradicators and characters, as well as at least one tanky Flamer squad like Assault Centurions or Flamestorm Aggressors. Add characters and Flamer-equipped Assault Squads to taste, and you have a delicious ganoush of fire-themed pain. The poster children of the 41st millennium, Ultramarines are also the poster children for being a kind of weird subfaction without a ton of identity. This is probably the chapter where the difference between parent and successor varieties are the most stark. Overall, the faction is defined by only a few key abilities. The first being rapid redeployment, which allows them to redeploy 3 units after the initiative roll, which gives them a special synergy with forward deploying units like Invictor Warsuits. The second is the Seal of Oath, a relic that allows for full rerolls targeting a specific enemy unit, making Ultramarines effective at punishing enemy armies relying on powerful Lords of War or big tanky bricks. Ultramarines also have a sub-theme of command point economy, which does make them a little bit more effective in the Warzone Nephilim format, where command points are a little bit more valuable. Pure OG Ultramarines come with a relatively underwhelming chapter tactic, but decades of novels and narrative focus have given them the widest selection of force multiplying special characters in the entire faction, including the big boy buff bot himself, Rabuti Gilliman. He's supported by a cast of Space Marine's most powerful librarian in Chief Librarian Tigerius, a couple CP saving options like Cato Sicarius, who can give objective secured access without requiring rights of war, and Cassius, a slightly less effective Master of Sanctity who isn't selfish enough to make you pay the hefty price for his chapter command upgrade. Armies from this chapter will typically revolve around a corps of dreadnoughts or bricks of core infantry, on whom the buffs from these characters can be stacked to present a dangerous and reasonably tanky frontline. That's in contrast to Ultramarine successor chapters, who don't have the benefit of these unique characters, but retain the synergies I mentioned earlier. These will typically equip successor tactics that synergize with an Invictor Warsuit Alpha Strike, running triple Invictor Warsuits in addition to drop Devastators and other forward operating elements for a Raven Guard-esque Alpha Strike with the ability to use that rapid redeployment to redeploy back into cover if the initiative roll doesn't go their way. Similarly to Raven Guard, this strategy is pretty dependent on the first turn roll-off and can be very inconsistent. Overall, that inconsistency kind of defines the Ultramarine subfaction, and while they have some flexibility in their game plan, the fact that they don't focus on any one strength puts them among the lower tiers of the faction. And that moves us on to White Scars, the last of the Codex-compliant Marine chapters. Unlike subfactions like Imperial Fists and Ultramarines that have an unfocused game plan, White Scars are a tool sharpened to a fine point. They are super fast and deal a ton of damage, with the ability to advance and charge, as well as a damage buff to their melee weapons in the Assault Doctrine. In fact, the playability of White Scars doesn't typically depend on their own abilities, but the direct comparison with the other melee-focused Space Marine chapter, Blood Angels. Both factions boast similar threat ranges and almost identical game plans, so the question becomes whether Blood Angels +1 to wound and situational extra attack overcome the White Scars Super Doctrine damage bonus. While the race is pretty close and is typically dependent on the stats represented elsewhere in the metagame, like, for example, how prevalent damage-reducing effects are to reduce the impact of that White Scars +1 damage bonus, Blood Angels' list of excellent secondaries and access to unique units like Sanguinary Guard usually see them win out in the comparison. And most lists will revolve almost entirely around triple units of Vanguard veterans who are able to deliver large numbers of Lightning Claw attacks. Other melee options like Blade Guard veterans make up the front line of the army, often supported by Corsaro Khan for an additional +1 to wound to kind of ape the Blood Angels subfaction ability, or one of White Scar's incredible smash character builds. Seasoned with a taste of assault weapons like Inceptors to benefit from the White Scar's ability to advance and fire without penalty, and you have a very aggressive and very lethal chapter. And now it's time to talk about supplemental chapters. These are chapters that are not Codex compliant and as such get most of their chapter specific abilities from a second supplement book. These tend to have a much more diverse and unique playstyle than Codex compliant chapters and make use of tools and units that are included within their own supplement book. They also have the benefit of having an entire tree of secondaries in addition to having access to the normal Space Marine secondaries, which means they have a much greater variety of game plan when choosing secondary objectives at the start of each game. Black Templars are focused on melee combat and primary objective control, with a lot of tricks to make their units significantly more survivable so that they can make it into melee without huge movement or charge buffs. They have a unique vow mechanic which allows them to choose a powerful benefit at the start of the game, like an army-wide invulnerable save or Gene-Rot Might in exchange for a drawback. With unique relics and buffs that can be applied to specific models in their units, Black Templars can abuse wound allocation rules alongside apothecaries to regenerate their buffed models to double dip on those defensive effects. Combined with resilience against mortal wounds from their chapter tactic, and aura or army-wide invulnerable saves from relics or vows, these abilities can make the army very difficult to deal with at range. Once on objectives, stratagems granting objective secured or allowing models to move onto objectives out of turn makes Black Templars one of the best chapters in the faction at stealing or holding territory. Black Templar armies will typically revolve around large bricks to double up on their defensive effects. Units like Big Crusader or Blade Guard veteran squads are very common, backed up by Eradicators and force multiplying characters like Chaplains, with whom the subfaction has particular synergy. In the running for one of the strongest Marine subfactions, mostly due to their access to secondary objectives, Blood Angels are one of 40k's preeminent melee armies. We already discussed their benefits in comparison to White Scars, but to reiterate, Blade Angels, just like White Scars, are fast and absolutely lethal in melee. With a built-in bonus to charge that can compound with pre-game moves from Death Company, movement improving effects like the Wrath of Baal standard, and charge rerolls from the Icon of the Angel, Blood Angels can combo some respectable threat ranges. Once in melee, a built-in +1 to wound from their chapter tactic and a super doctrine for an additional attack make every melee weapon in the faction very dangerous. This will often cause Blood Angels armies to play extremely defensively, scoring secondaries like Relentless Assault with small Death Company or Assault Squads, with the majority of their army waiting until their Super Doctrine activates, so that even small combat squads can become dangerous enough to trade for dramatically more than they're worth. These armies will almost always focus on jump pack infantry, with 3 units of Sanguinary Guard and supporting characters at their core. Death Company, Vanguard Veterans, Assault Squads, and Land Speeders fill out the rest and allow the army to score their excellent secondaries very consistently. The award for probably the weirdest chapter may go to Dark Angels. While they are a single chapter, Dark Angels are essentially composed of 3 sub-factions. The Deathwing, ridiculously tanky but slow Terminators, the Raven Wing, ridiculously fast bikers and flying units, and regular Dark Angels, which the community has nicknamed Green Wing because they paint their army green, unlike the other 2 subfactions. While these all benefit from the Dark Angels chapter tactic, Raven Ring and Deathwing get additional subfaction abilities if they're in their own detachments, and all 3 have entirely unique super doctrines. This splits Dark Angels into distinctive builds, and while Green Wing builds are occasionally played, they're certainly less popular and less effective than pure Death or Raven Wing. To start with, Deathwing builds focus on hyper tanky objective secured Terminators and Deathwing Knights, with defensive secondaries that can rack up while slowly making their way to their opponent's side of the table. These lists are very much a stat check, with many armies absolutely unable to deal with 30 to 40 Terminator bodies, all with their permanent transhuman physiology effect to make wound rolls of 1, 2, or 3 automatically fail. Combine that with a powerful armor save, good and vulnerable saves, and armor of contempt, and these Terminators are extremely difficult to move with conventional attacks. Ravenwing lists focus on units like Storm Speeders, Aircraft, and Black Knights to deliver crippling alpha strikes. Being more offensively oriented than defensively, they tend to be a little bit more consistent and better at taking opposing objectives, with the downside of being much more fragile. Overall, Dark Angels as a chapter are among the upper echelon of the faction, and their flexibility in list construction only reinforces that. The last of the Black Armored Space Marine chapters, Deathwatch, are unique in the Space Marine faction for a few reasons. The first being that they function almost entirely within an Army of Renown, and that Army of Renown, and the sub-faction in general, revolves around a unique hybrid-style unit, the Deathwatch Kill Team. Kill Teams are mixed units composed of a variety of infantry types, all wearing the same armor mark. Firstborn Marines form Proteus teams, Gravis units form Indomitor teams, Phobos units, Spectrus teams, and regular Primaris form Fortis Kill teams. Each team is composed of 5 regular guys from that army type, like Intercessors or Heavy Intercessors, but can include 5 additional models from any unit type using that armor. The big benefit here is that you can get a Blade of Wounds for your special weapons, with Heavy Intercessors in an Indomitor team eating shots for Eradicators or Inceptors, for example. These specialist models will also often provide special abilities like the ability to fall back and shoot. The other big benefit is that these teams are all troops, not only giving them all objectives secured, but also letting you take the special weapon models in larger numbers than you normally could, and often in larger units that you can in a standard squad. This is the case with Eliminators, 5 of whom can be taken in a Spectrus team, whereas a standard Eliminator squad is only ever composed of 3. This makes Kill Team's construction extremely flexible, and while Deathwatch will typically be focused on infantry-based lists, using repositional effects like teleporters and drop pods to deliver themselves, the capabilities of these units can vary widely, depending on the war gear and loadout of the special models in the squad. In most competitive Deathwatch lists, these come together to form a Kill Team Strike Force, an army of renown that requires all the kill teams to have a specialism upgrade that makes them more effective against a particular battlefield role, and unlocks the ability for additional chapter tactics to be chosen over the course of the game for added flexibility, as well as a powerful stratagem that allows their hits to automatically wound against their chosen specialism target. This gives Deathwatch a powerful tool against enemies that are particularly resilient to conventional attacks. Automatically wounding with attacks that are highly accurate or potentially auto-hit like Flamers means that any amount of defensive technology like hit or wound penalties, transhuman effects, etc. are all no defense against the Kill Team Strike Force. This isn't really enough to put Deathwatch out of the middle of the road in terms of Marine chapters, but at least they're extremely unique and oftentimes very powerful from a metagame standpoint. Now last but not least, we will talk about the old dog of Space Marine chapters, the Space Wolves. Unlike the other non-compliant factions that we've just covered, Space Wolves aren't as divergent in playstyle from Codex Marine chapters, but make up for that with a deep toolbox of abilities that can make their game plan way more consistent. The overarching theme of Space Wolves is fight phase control. They have a plethora of fight last effects like Murderous Hurricane and Armor of Rust, backed up by heroic interventions and units like Wolfen that fight on death. This makes engaging into a Space Wolves army offensively very difficult, and allow them totally to control the fight phase when they themselves are on the offense. This allows them to support a more normal game plan, backing up their melee control with ranged units like Dreadnoughts or drop Devastator squads, and they can use those heavy weapon teams effectively with the ability to outflank them off any table edge and ignore penalties they hit, including the penalty for moving and shooting their heavy weapons using their stratagem Keen Senses. Taken all together, this creates a relatively normal Space Marine chapter, with a melee flair and a very high skill ceiling. Space Wolves lists will typically focus on powerful characters and jump pack infantry like Wolfguard or Skyclaw squads, backed up by Longfangs, Dreadnoughts, or Eradicators to add some ranged punch, while Bricks of Wolfen add a melee powerhouse that can fight for central objectives or defend their home objectives very effectively. And that's it! That is all of the major Space Marine chapters in Warhammer 40,000 broken down. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about this style of video, and if you'd like me to cover sub-factions in any other armies as well. This one took way longer than I expected to create, so I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please drop a like and a subscribe. Help support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. It also helps let me know what you like, so if you like this style of video, I can do more of them in the future. Otherwise, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members that you can join in the link down below the video, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.